for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Dave Payne, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the December 21st issue of the Viewpoints section of the Buffalo News on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Okay, our first article is entitled, Reiner's Life Was Driven by Compassion. This is written by Steve Lopez. Whether you sat across the table from him or across the aisle, Rob Reiner left no doubt about what he cared about and was willing to fight for. I had lunch with him once at Pete's Cafe in downtown LA, where he was far less interested in what was on his plate than what was on his mind. He was advocating for local investments in early childhood development programs, using funds from the tobacco tax created by Proposition 10 in 1998, which he helped spearhead. I remember thinking that although political activism among celebrities was nothing new, Reiner was well beyond the easier task of making endorsements and hosting fundraisers. He had an understanding of public policy failures and entrenched inequities, and he wanted to talk about the moral duty to address them and the financial benefits of doing so. He was deeply passionate, said Ben Austin, who was at that lunch and worked as an aide to Reiner at the time. He was not just a Hollywood star, but a highly sophisticated political actor. Reiner, who was found dead in his Brentwood home last weekend along with his wife Michelle, was also co-founder of the American Foundation for Equal Rights, which was instrumental in the fight to legalize same-sex marriage in California in 2008. Michelle Singer-Reiner was her husband's intellectual partner as an activist, Austin said, even though he was usually the one whose face we saw. But Michelle made her voice heard, too, as she did when emailing me about the inexcusable crisis of veterans living on the street, including on the West LA Veterans Administration campus at a time when it was loaded with empty buildings. I'd check on the progress and get back to her, and she'd check back again when little had changed. At one point, I told her I'd been informed that beds in a new shelter would be filled by the end of the year. And if you believe that, she wrote back, I've got a bridge for you. In choosing his causes, Austin said of Rob Reiner, the actor, director, producer was not jumping on a train that was already moving. Universal preschool education was barely a fringe issue at the time, Austin said, but Reiner was more interested in social change than making political points. Reiner's aggressive instincts, though, sometimes drew pushback. And not just from President Trump, who established a new low for himself Monday with his social media claim that Reiner's death was a result of his disdain for Trump. Reiner resigned in 2006 as chairman of California First 5 Commission, an outgrowth of Proposition 10, after Los Angeles Times reported raised questions about the use of tax dollars to promote Proposition 82. That Reiner-backed ballot measure would have taxed the rich to plow money into preschool for 4-year-olds. In 2014, Reiner was at the center of a bid to limit commercial development and chain stores in Malibu, and I co-moderated a debate that seemed more like a boxing match between him and developer Steve Sabelroff. As the Malibu Times described it, Rob Reiner and Steve Sabelroff came out with guns blazing Sunday night during a Measure R debate that's sure to be one of the most memorable and entertaining Malibu showdowns in recent town history. Reiner threw an early jab accusing Sabelroff of a backroom deal to add an exemption to the measure. "That's a lie," Sabelroff shot back, claiming he was insulted by the low blow. Reiner, who owned houses in both Brentwood and Malibu, didn't care much for my question about whether his slow-growth viewpoint smacked of NIMBYism. "I would say there's a lot of NIMBYism," Reiner snapped. "You bet, it's 100% NIMBYism. Everybody who lives here is concerned about their way of life." But that's the way Reiner was. He let you know without apology where he stood, kind of like his meathead character in Norman Lear's hit TV show All in the Family, in which he butted heads with the bigoted Archie Bunker. Getting back to Trump, he too unapologetically lets you know where he stands. But most people, in my experience, work with filters. They can self-censor when that's what the moment calls for. It's not a skill. It's an innate sense of decency with human consideration that exists in the hearts and souls of normal people. I did not know much about history of Nick Reiner's addiction issues and his temporary homelessness, but it became clear shortly after the bodies were found that the Reiner's 32-year-old son might have been involved and was indeed booked a short time later on suspicion of murder. What I do know is that with such an unspeakable horror, and with the family survivors left to sort through the madness of it all, a better response from the president would have been silence. Anything but a grave dance. The Reiners died, Trump said, reportedly due to the anger he caused others through his massive, unyielding, and incurable affliction with a mind-crippling disease known as Trump derangement syndrome. The deaths occurred, Trump continued, as the Trump administration surpassed all goals and expectations of greatness. It was a reaction, Austin said, that makes the case better than Rob ever could have about why Trump has no business being president of the United States. That article is from the Los Angeles Times. The reporter was from the Los Angeles Times. Okay, our second article, front page here, is entitled, "Collins' Life Has Been Remarkable. The Same Can't Be Said of His Book." There's a picture of Chris Collins, who was a former Republican congressman from Western New York, who was the first member of Congress to endorse Donald Trump's presidency. Collins was later pardoned by Trump. There's a picture of him on the front page of the Viewpoints here. Looks like outside a courthouse, actually, being interviewed by reporters. Okay, now onto the article. It's written by Jeremy Zemsky. It takes a special sort of person to write a book called My Remarkable Life. It takes a person like Chris Collins. Over the course of 352 pages, the former Buffalo area businessman, congressman and felon, and current Florida congressional candidate proves that, yes, his life has been quite remarkable. But remarkable and readable are two different things, and herein lies the trouble with My Remarkable Life, the Collins memoir just published by Bombardier Books. While it tells a compelling story, parts of the book read like they were written by an engineer, which they were. First, though, let's give Collins his due. He lived quite a story as he earned his millions, and without stating so specifically and without any bragging, Collins shows in My Remarkable Life that he has a rare entrepreneurial spirit, one that quickly turned him from a fledgling engineer into a multimillionaire, and from a multimillionaire into a politician. Collins best sums up this story in the book's first chapter, in which he writes, "Looking back, the events that shaped my life weren't random. They were the result of effort, adaptability, and readiness to embrace change. While some moments may seem surreal, they are a testament to the power of preparation and the opportunities that arise when you're willing to act." That first chapter is titled, "The Harder You Work, the Luckier You Get." And over the next few chapters, Collins proves that point. We get a relatively quick look back at Collins' childhood, where his family moved multiple times as his father, a General Electric executive, won promotion after promotion. We hear about the dilemma that Collins faced after college, when he had a choice between an engineering job at GE or a sales engineer job from Westinghouse. Collins chose the latter, thereby unwittingly putting himself on the path to riches. And then we get a long and detailed account of Collins' business career and the chances he took along the way, which unfortunately often reads like a corporate earnings report. For example, as Collins tells the story of the early years of Nuttall Gear, the Westinghouse spinoff that served as his first entrepreneurial venture, he writes, "During 1984 and 85, Nuttall successfully fulfilled the 876 WNT-44 gear drive contract for Westinghouse. Frank Corral, boasting our base load." So it goes for much of the book's first 129 pages, which recount Collins's serial business ventures in inside baseball minutia, interrupted only by two lively chapters on his 1998 race for Congress against then Representative John J. LaFalce. It's a shame that those chapters about Collins' business career are so dense, because the density distracts from the sheer wonder of the story. Here was a business leader who invested in company after company, turning nearly every one of them around, but in the end, the memoir left me asking, how did he do it? Save for a brief passage in which Collins discusses an accounting method that he favors that points to a company's true value, he offers little insight that would answer this question. Who knows? Maybe it was serendipity, which was Collins' original title for this book, before he decided the word sold him short. Truth be told, though, people who buy My Remarkable Life probably won't do so to learn more about Collins' business acumen. They're likely to be looking for insight into Collins' political career. It's abrupt and his current comeback and those passages of the book often sing while the other passages stammer. For example, in the book's deftly written introduction, Collins quickly gets to the part of his life story that readers will most likely want to learn more about: his 2017 arrest for insider trading charges, his subsequent imprisonment, and the pardon President Trump granted to free him just before Christmas in 2020. As you'll discover in these pages, I faced allegations that I believe were unfounded, Collins writes. In a desperate bid to protect my family, I made the painful decision to enter a guilty plea under pressure from our own Justice Department. It was a decision born of necessity, not admission, and one that left scars I carry to this day. To be specific, Collins resigned from Congress and pleaded guilty in October 2019 in hopes of winning leniency for his son Cameron, with whom he had shared a secret stock tip 2 years earlier. The move worked. While the former congressman was sentenced to 26 months in prison, Cameron Collins, who, unlike his father, actually sold stock based on insider information, escaped with 5 years of supervised release and probation. While Collins' wife, Mary, called that news, I was so relieved I couldn't think straight and had to ask her to repeat herself. I sat down and cried uncontrollably, Collins writes. That's just one of several passages late in the book that portray Collins not as the hard-headed businessman/politician that Western New York voters knew, but as the emotionally shattered shell of a man that he was for a time as he awaited and endured a prison sentence in 2020. Whether you like Collins or not, whether you disagree with him or not, it's hard to read those passages without feeling for the guy and to some degree understanding his rage at what he calls the Department of Injustice. If you do like Collins, you will be happy to hear that he's running for Congress again, this time in the conservative Southwest Florida district where he and his wife now live. Oddly, though, Collins never really explains his motivation for running again in My Remarkable Life, but maybe he's just saving that for a sequel. After all, a congressional comeback in an adopted state far from home, 7 years after a guilty plea to felony charges, would make a remarkable life even more remarkable. A note on the reporter for this article: Jerry Zemsky retired in October after 36 years as a reporter in the Buffalo News Washington Bureau. He covered Collins during his congressional career and was the first reporter to write about potential insider trading involving Collins. Zemsky now writes This Hard Land, a weekly column on politics and culture at jerryzemsky.substack.com. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Viewpoints section of the Buffalo News on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Our next article is entitled Stay the Course. Setbacks should not weaken New York's commitment to promoting clean energy. By now, it's perfectly obvious that New York's pace toward fulfilling the goals laid out by its 2019 Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act legislation has slowed in some areas and stalled in others. The state's finalized energy blueprint for the next 15 years, which, as the News's Matt Glynn reports, has just been released, confirms this. Though the new energy plan does call for developing large amounts of solar and wind, it also specifies keeping fossil fuels in the mix for the all of the above approach, so beloved by those who want to keep the state's aging fossil fuel infrastructure in operation as long as possible. New York's recent pause on the All-Electric Building Act, which was supposed to take effect in January, is another action that has given environmental advocates reason to grumble. It should be noted, however, that the suspension of the law's regulation was made pending a Second Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals decision on a lawsuit filed 2 years ago by a series of trade groups and labor unions. Through spokespeople, Governor Kathy Hochul has said she is committed to the all-electric law, which is a central element of New York's climate plan. Given that U.S. District Judge Glenn Sotheby has already said the argument of the lawsuit has no merit, in his initial ruling on this case, many advocates of the electrification feel the pause was unneeded. Supporters of New York's transition to clean energy are justified in their concerns over these delays. Waiting to initiate important regulation will not make that transition any easier. As it is, fossil fuel companies and those who agree with the Trump administration's denial of climate change are justifiably encouraged. The sooner New York moves forward, navigating a road that was always going to be bumpy, the sooner the benefits of cleaner, cheaper energy can be realized. State leaders should be finding more ways to encourage residents with better rebates and other assistance who want to try technologies like solar panels and heat pumps. In a recent letter to the editor commenting on high energy bills, local advocate Sarah Schultz noted, "While families are contending with rising costs of everything else, I have transitioned to an electric home, as many I know, and we enjoy the freedom from high utility costs." Schultz has also commented, "There's a lot of misinformation out there about solar." There are people like Schultz throughout New York. Their stories should be shared in an educational effort by the state. It might be a way to combat the fear-mongering coming from the natural gas industry. When consumers say that their switch to clean energy has lowered their utility costs and PR firms for business groups and fuel companies are insisting the opposite, it should be kept in mind who has the most to gain. To be sure, the Trump administration is doing its worst to hinder the New York's journey to clean energy. This month, New York Attorney General Letitia James joined a coalition of 15 other attorneys general and the governor of Pennsylvania, accusing federal officials of unlawfully blocking congressionally approved funding, billions of dollars meant for electric vehicle charging projects. That unexplained and probably illegal blocking of clean energy funding is only the most recent in a series of federal moves that have pulled back funds already allocated by Congress and intended for consumer rebates and incentives for large-scale clean energy projects. In addition to fighting these moves, we depend on James for that. The state must continue to identify other resources to incentivize the creation and adoption of clean energy. Change is hard. That's why New York needs to continue strong and confident as it creates a cleaner, healthier environment for residents and, equally important, lessens the disastrous effects of climate change, even if it does take a few more years. Okay, next article is the My View column. It's entitled, "Let's Endeavor to Be Cratchits and Baileys." This article is written by David Spragata, believes that there are two eternal holiday movies. After the passage of Thanksgiving, I can't help but start thinking of Christmas Eve. Christmas Eve, also known as Wigilia, in our household, is likely my favorite night of the year. After a family dinner surrounded by children, nieces, nephews, brothers, sisters, parents, and spouses spanning 4 generations, we head off to my wife's family and do it again. The kids can hardly hold their excitement to see what Santa will bring the next day, as I try to take it all in and recognize that this stage of life, like any, is temporary. One thing that hasn't been as temporary is that whenever we get in for the night, we watch It's a Wonderful Life on broadcast TV. I'm sure we could stream it or watch it on DVD, but it wouldn't be tradition. Even though the movie was made decades before I was born, it's very relatable. The Baileys have 4 children, and I was also raised in a household of 6. Still, that hardly compares with the household of 9 my dad grew up in, or 11 in my maternal grandfather's. After the night of being surrounded by hordes of family and breaking the apletak with everyone, it just feels right. The following day, after presents and Mass, I follow the tradition of watching the 1951 version of Scrooge, featuring Alistair Sim. Likely at this point, the kids have already watched the Muppets version, and my wife and I have watched Bill Murray and Scrooged. Still, nothing tops the 1951 version. I think it is because the protagonist, Bob Cratchit, and his big, poor family are easy to root for. Just like George Bailey's family in It's a Wonderful Life, Bob places his family first. Bob and George aren't preoccupied with worldly success, and they certainly don't care about empowerment or climbing the social ladder. They are focused on what they can do for their family, children, and communities through self-sacrifice. Theirs is a different kind of wealth. Even though they live modestly, one thing they ultimately achieve is peace and love. Meanwhile, the antagonists, Ebenezer Scrooge and Mr. Potter, are the richest men in town, materially at least, though they are constantly restless, lonely, and miserable. They're anxious and depressed, while the Bailey family and Cratchit family are singing and smiling and hugging and dancing. I believe we all need to aspire to become who Harry Bailey informs us is truly the richest man in town. Tiny Tim serves as our conscience and finds solace that those seeing him in his condition might remember who made lame beggars walk and blind men see. It reminds me of my Catholic education, where you're warned not to store treasures on earth but in heaven and the transcendent. Modern Christmas movies don't have the same soul or anything that makes me feel like I need to watch them more than once. Nothing stands out or endears. So many modern shows go the route of Sex and the City or Mad Men, promoting the Potter and Scrooge lifestyles. This Christmas and New Year's, I hope to do better in embodying the humility and self-sacrifice of the Cratchits and Baileys and avoid the greed and avarice of Potter and Scrooge. I hope you and your families all have a Merry Christmas, and as Tiny Tim says, God bless everyone. Okay, our next article is entitled, Cheney Still Fighting While Green Chose to Turn Tail, Run Away. Marjorie Taylor Greene's early exit from Congress reveals that her tough broad persona was very much an act. After she angered Donald Trump by demanding release of the Epstein files, she became a target of the slings, arrows, and threats unleashed by the president and his enforcers. Her response? Flight. Once I left her, she resigned, Trump said. She would never have survived a primary. Maybe, maybe not. But the woman who posted a picture of herself holding a rifle alongside photos of 3 liberal congresswomen turned tail. Green held a good number of lunatic beliefs, but her push to get to the bottom of Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking of girls was well-founded and evidently shared by most Republicans. Green could have learned a lesson in courage from a very different Republican congresswoman, Liz Cheney of Wyoming. Cheney is about as ideologically conservative as they come, but she regarded Trump's violence-fueled attempt to halt the official vote count in an election he had lost as an attack on the democracy itself. And that's what the 2021 Capitol riot was. Cheney joined a handful of patriotic Republicans in supporting Trump's impeachment. For her brave stance, the so-called Freedom Caucus demanded her resignation from the House Republican leadership, where she ranked number 3. Before Trump erupted into his 2020 election lies, Cheney had supported about 93% of Trump's positions. She was a loyal Republican, but an even more loyal American. The amoral Kevin McCarthy, then Republican House Minority Leader, warned the party's political consultants that they have to choose between working for her or for him. The Morning Group, a fundraising firm that Cheney had hired to help prepare for the next primary, immediately refused to work further on her campaign. A spokesman for Cheney said, "It's sad, but not surprising that Kevin McCarthy is continuing down the morally bankrupt path of embracing House Republicans who are white supremacists and conspiracy theorists, but attacking Liz Cheney for telling the truth and standing with the Constitution." Add to that the anonymous threats of personal harm. Cheney did not flinch. She ran for re-election in 2022. When asked whether she expected to lose, Cheney said that if defending the Constitution cost her the seat, it was sacrifice she'd accept. She ended up losing to a MAGA clone. The coup attempt was okay with Green, but the moment Trump called her a traitor, she threw on her sneakers and ran away. Another party member, Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, is now bravely facing a primary challenge after being one of 3 Senate Republicans who voted to convict Trump for inciting the January 6th riot. Cassidy is a physician who has long criticized Trump's health secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., over his fringe theories linking vaccines to autism. When Green announced her sudden retirement, she warned, "If I am cast aside by the president and the MAGA political machine and replaced by neocons, big pharma, big tech, military, industrial war complex, foreign leaders, and the elite donor class that can never, ever relate to real Americans, then many common Americans have been cast aside and replaced as well." She cast herself aside. In any case, if Green believes all that stuff, why doesn't she run for re-election and use it in her campaign? Because she's chicken. It happens that both Cheney and Green crossed Trump for good reasons, but Green fled. Outside for her entertainment value, she will not be widely missed. But Cheney keeps fighting, armor still on. And if she comes back to run again, plenty of good Americans will be cheering her on. That article was written by Froma Harap. A reminder, you're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Viewpoints section of the Buffalo News on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Okay, I'll now read an article from the Hints from Heloise column. Okay. Dear Heloise, my hint is more of a suggestion. If a relative or loved one who passed away wore eyeglasses, why not donate them to a charity that reuses them for the needy? The Lions Club's Vision program is available in many communities, with collection boxes for old eyeglasses at places like libraries and eye doctors' offices. And to add to the recent hint of making fluffier scrambled eggs, add a small amount of coffee creamer instead of milk. It makes a difference. That was written by Pat G. in Olmsted Township in Ohio. Our next column here, under Hints from Heloise, is Animal Abuse. Dear Heloise, please tell the reader from Indiana whose neighbor's cats gave birth in her barn to call the local Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals or an animal shelter. People need to take responsibility for the problem they themselves have created. Cats and dogs cannot request birth control. It's the human's responsibility to spay and neuter them. Putting a radio in the barn to make them move on and become someone else's problem is not only cruel but passing the buck. This kind of behavior is why we have a problem. I know it seems unfair since this mother's cat is not her cat, but until people start acting responsibly, the problem will never end. That's written by Kay Smith in Houston. Our next article here under the Hints from Heloise is Folded Bed Sheet Edges. Dear Heloise, on the subject of folded over bed sheet edges, no amount of ironing will keep them flat because they are purposely woven to do this. The edge eventually cracks, necessitating the purchase of new sheets. Then a whole set must be purchased because single sheets are not offered. It follows the industry trend to make products that don't last. It used to be a competition to see who could make the best product. Now it is who can make the cheapest. Cheapest in quality, not price. And all brands have followed suit. If one brand shrinks, they all do on the same day. Durable goods are better called reusable disposables. Back to the sheet problem. The only way to fix the edge is to cut it off and sew a new hem. I have 50-year-old sheets that have pristine hems, so no manufacturer can tell me it's the way I wash, dry, or iron them that is the problem. The problem is predetermined obsolescence. Buy, discard, buy. Been there and seen it for 88 years. That was sent in by a reader via email. And our last column our last article under the Hints from Heloise is Pacemaker Problems. Dear Heloise, for those of us who have pacemakers in our bodies, I have a hint. This is my fourth one after my ablation. I still had problems breathing, so I contacted my technician who programs pacemakers. She reprogrammed it, and now all is well. So don't be afraid to ask. It was sent in by Joe Wilbur via email. Okay. We now read everybody's column. These are letters written in from readers of the Buffalo News. Our first One is entitled Tariffs Are Necessary for Balanced Trade. During the Great Depression, the Roosevelt administration published photographs of Americans in desperate circumstances to familiarize citizens with the realities being faced at that time. The FDIC and Social Security from that era have since helped prevent devastating banking panics and their results. The reality of today's impoverished millions unable to earn enough to feed themselves became more visible during our recent government shutdown when a potential disaster was averted by food drives and restarting SNAP and other delayed relief programs. The first consideration of any system is always to preserve itself. However, we have over $38 trillion in national debt when food and shelter are issues with average Americans. After 50 years, the supply-side trade and economic experiment has run its course. We must have a healthy middle class to pay the bills. Tariffs, as a necessity for balanced trades to protect domestic manufacturing, can be overdone or underdone. It's time for those earning enough for 1,000 lifetimes to stop whining against tariffs at the expense of the rest of the country. Those who suffered at Valley Forge didn't do it to be left out of a future equation. That article is written by Louis Boehm from Orchard Park. Okay, next column's entitled Rural Communities Rely on Health Care Credits. Rural New York families are struggling with high costs, and now we're facing another blow. Congress is allowing the Affordable Care Act premium tax credits to expire. If that happens, health insurance premiums across our region will jump dramatically in 2026, and thousands of people could lose coverage. Instead of protecting the health care that rural communities rely on, Republican Nick Langworthy voted for a bill that cuts Medicaid funding, threatens rural hospitals, and refuses to extend the ACA tax credits and keep premiums affordable for working families. Our region has some of the highest health care needs in New York, and many people here simply cannot afford a sudden spike in monthly premiums. Meanwhile, the bill Langworthy supported delivers large tax breaks to corporations, including insurance and pharmaceutical companies, by reducing their tax obligations while cutting the very programs families depend on. In other words, corporations save money while Southern Tier families pay more. Congress must extend the ACA tax credits now. Families here deserve affordable, reliable health care, not higher bills and fewer options. Tell Congressman Langworthy to vote for extending your ACA subsidies. It was written by Jim Carr, the statewide president of Public Employees Federation in Millport. Next, many rely on federal help for health care. With over 30% of Buffalonians living below the poverty line, many rely on government assistance to provide health care for their families. One glimmer of hope, although the administration proposed $85 million for maternal and child health, the House Subcommittee on Appropriations approved $915 million. This is a fraction of our health care needs, but shows that compassion exists in Congress. Let your elected congressional leaders know that you insist that adequate health care assistance will be made available for all Americans. It's written by Bruce Davidson, East Amherst. Next, lawmakers' indifference will have deadly results. We are told this is the richest country in the world, yet millions of people will lose their health subsidy on December 31st. Republican senators say it's too expensive. It wasn't too expensive to give millionaires and big businesses more tax breaks. Ours is the only industrialized country that doesn't have universal health care. Americans will die because of this. I have no doubt about it. It's written by Deanna Purcell of Angola. Next, houses of worship is inclusive term to use. A recent Buffalo News editorial, district leaders need effective ways to share information on school closures, addressed a very sensitive topic. Students and families are connected educationally, socially, and civically to their local schools. The editorial rightly encourages Buffalo Public School Superintendent Pascal Mubenga and the School Closure Committee to draw a larger audience to discuss and hear the plans for closing 2 schools for fiscal reasons. In their specific suggestions, the editorial writers should have used houses of worship instead of church as a suggestion to get the word out. Buffalo is home to people of many faiths who pray in mosques, temples, and synagogues. To be truly inclusive, the Buffalo News should use its power of effective communication to encourage the strengthening of civil society. That's written by Mara Coven-Gelman of Buffalo. Next, Hochul should sign bill regarding dog breeds. With only days left in the year, an important animal protection bill was delivered to the governor's desk for consideration. Bill S.364 would ensure that our state's renters won't be denied coverage over the breed of dog they own. Homeowners already have protections in place and can't be denied coverage based on breed. There are more renters than homeowners statewide, with Erie County likely following this trend, and these rights should be afforded equally. Governor Kathy Hochul has an outstanding record of advancing animal welfare measures, and I'm hopeful this legislation will be brought back for reconsideration if it is not signed. Dogs need to be in homes where they belong and out of overburdened shelters. That was written by Christine Hutton of North Tonawanda. Our next is Trump's National Guard deployment is wrong. I abhor the idea of any more young American servicemen and women being on the receiving end of violence in our cities. I have great difficulty accepting that there are National Guard soldiers patrolling so many cities of the greatest nation in the world. Do I believe Ramahala Lakanwal needs to be severely punished for his actions? Absolutely, but I also believe he most likely had severe mental problems to do what he did. How can even a meticulous vetting system totally predict the future behavior of a person? I also believe that false information is destroying our country. To blame Biden solely for his Operation Allies Welcome program for Afghans who had helped us in the war there is ludicrous. Lakanwal went through standard immigration and asylum application processes from both political sides. So you could also blame Trump for approving his asylum status. Sounds like a Democrat-Republican blame game to me. Throwing around the Trump derangement syndrome card sounds like a repetition of what Trump spews to thwart any Americans from finding fault with his decisions or behavior. Any American that verifies facts and then disagrees with the direction our country is heading has something more like TRC, Trump Reality Check. That was written by Catherine Trousseau from Lockport. And our last column from our viewpoint section here, letters from the readers, is demonizing immigrants lessens America's promise. I grew up in the 1930s and was at the birth of the acronym. It was unique and was destined to become a way of life in the United States and to spread around the world. I now find myself drowning in a sea of acronyms. Case in point, for quite a while we have been bombarded with DEI. It took me some time to not only know what these letters stood for, but their significance for the people who traffic in its use most often. It is an epithet, something we should run away from at max speed. Before we came to this marvelous land, it was peopled by a native population of from 60 to 100 million inhabitants. Sad to say, through great adversity and horrible treatment, they have been reduced to about 10 million. For all intents and purposes, they were the original residents in this land. All who followed are immigrants. That's you and me, folks. Our forefathers recognized and committed to documents their understanding that the strength of our nation would be in all those who followed them, no matter what color, creed, or faith. And so it came to be. They brought with them a desire to breathe the sweet air of freedom. We all, through our service, have come together to make this a special place on earth, and through the strength, wisdom, and sweat of all the newcomers, a shining edifice was built. We must not let selfish leaders destroy this creation through their avariciousness. If we abandon DEI, everything will be lost. How tragic that would be. And that was written by Joseph Spina in Amherst. Okay. Just a reminder, you're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Viewpoints section of the Buffalo News on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Okay, our last article is under the Another Voice / Health column. It's entitled, Holidays Are Hard for the Neurodivergent. It's written by Mary Pasiak. She's a coach for autistic and ADHD woman and author of the Neurodivergent Holiday Survival Guide. The holiday season brings sensory overload, disrupted routines, and endless to-do lists. It's a lot for everyone, but it can be overwhelming when you are autistic or have ADHD. Neurodivergent brains process the world differently. Sensory input, noise, lights, crowd, smells become overwhelming faster. Social interactions are more draining. Managing all the moving parts takes more mental energy. So does switching from one activity to another. And when routines get disrupted, it's harder to stay regulated. Here's how to design holidays that feel better for everyone. Strategic shortcuts. It's important to conserve energy for what actually matters. Consider buying pre-made cookie dough instead of baking from scratch, using gift bags instead of wrapping paper, setting up a tabletop tree instead of a full-size one, or skipping the fancy tablecloths and holiday-themed dishes. Time tweaks. The traditional holiday structure, with weeks of anticipation culminating in one intense day, can be particularly challenging for the neurodivergent people. Think about hosting brunch instead of dinner so it ends earlier in the day, scheduling a family visit for January when things are calmer, or building 30-minute breaks between activities, or attending part of an event instead of the whole thing. Sensory adjustments. Sensory overwhelm can transform potentially meaningful experiences into unbearable ordeals. Small changes can make a big difference. Sound. Use noise-canceling headphones or earplugs. Play instrumental music instead of songs with lyrics. Take breaks in quiet space. Light. Have warm, dim lighting instead of bright overheads. Use candles instead of electric lights. Avoid flashing decorations. And touch. Wear soft, comfortable clothing. Bring familiar comfort items like weighted lap blankets or soft scarves. And social. Arrive early before it gets crowded. Invite fewer people. Schedule activities for times when you have more energy. We all tend to do things the same way every year simply because we feel obligated to. But the reality is that some traditions create more stress than joy when you're autistic or have ADHD. The goal isn't a picture-perfect holiday. It's a holiday that you and your family actually enjoy. Again, that was from the Another Voice column. Another Voice is an issues-oriented column that appears on the editorial page each day. Writers must have some background or expertise on the topic about which they're writing. Submissions should be about 480 words. Email submissions to editpage@buffnews.com. That's EDIDTPAGE at buffnews.com. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the December 21st issue of the Viewpoints section of the Buffalo News. We read from Viewpoints section of the Buffalo News every Sunday at 6 p.m. Your reader has been Dave Payne. Thank you for listening, and happy holidays.
Coming up next on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have the National Enquirer. At 8 p.m., we have People Magazine. And at 9 o'clock, we have the New York Times Book Review. Stay tuned for these readings and more. And if you have any comments, suggestions, or questions, please stay with us. If you're listening to this publication online, you're probably using our website, a podcast player like Spotify or iTunes, a streaming service like Zero, or a smart speaker. Did you know that we now have a dedicated app that can be downloaded to any mobile device, like a smartphone or tablet, for free? App users can conveniently access our live stream and any episode of our podcast easier than ever. To download the app, just type NFRRS in the search window in the Apple App Store or in the Google Play Store. Contact us anytime if you have any questions by calling 716-821-5555, extension 5. Thank you. following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision,